Can you believe that the same artist who did this painting also did this painting? I want to take you down a path to show you how that happened. What we see in this painting was done very early. And by the way, the artist we're talking about is Mondrian, Mondrian. You might have heard of him and you might not have heard of him. But he nevertheless was a prominent artist during the early abstractionist period down in the early 1900s, or the early 20th century, if you want to call it that. So, but the thing is, those abstract artists weren't just throwing paint or trying to be cutesy. Every one of them was dealing with something serious, and they had little innate qualities within themselves that guide them. This is true right here with Mondrian. Now, it's not just a windmill here, but this was one of his paintings that represents something that he was intrigued by from the very earliest time. And that is, he was intrigued by rectangles that he found in images. You see the rectangle here, the emphasis on the rectangular here. And you might say, oh, well, that's just part of the building. Okay, it was part of the building, but it was also the rectangle. And look down here, do you see the emphasis on the little rectangles and squares? And here, that emphasis on the rectangle and the square and the straight line was innate to him, and you could see that represented. Let's move to a portrait that he did in the 1900s. Actually, I think it was done in the year 1900. The windmill was done later. But what I want you to notice here, look at the background. Look at the little squares we see emphasized in the background there. Little straight lines there that gives that feeling of square. And also notice the horizontal here of the shirt. And the horizontal, the way the face is situated, looking straight towards us, giving us that vertical movement as it moves down, as our eyes move down the canvas. That vertical movement that becomes also a part of everything we see in later years from him. As we then I want to show you another example of something else that he did. Now this one was done really 11 years later. In between that time, Mondrian was moving back and forth between doing more realistic painting and then more abstraction. One thing remained consistent throughout, and that was his continuing to be fascinated by the rectangle, square, and straight line. And if you look throughout the way this is broken up, it's very flat, feeling of very flat. We know it's a tree, but we can see that it is an abstracted tree. Nevertheless, we can see these rectangles. So the rectangle continues to be repeated in here, here, and here. We can move on throughout the whole piece and see that rectangle repeated. See, and the squares begin to appear. You see his squares begin to appear, the way he was shaping his brush strokes, so that we can feel that feeling of the square movement. And again, the horizontal feeling of the tree in the movement, the horizontal feeling of the tree in this direction of the movement. Now, as he moved throughout his painting, some people who wouldn't be looking for those particular characteristics might think that he didn't know what he wanted to do. Well, in his exploration of his work as he matured, he was trying to find what way felt purest to him to do the very most minimal painting that he could do and still represent whatever's happening on the canvas. Now let's move now to seeing another portrait that he did 18 years later. And by this time, he's been moving back and forth between all kinds of subjects and ways of presenting them. But this is a constant theme throughout everything that we see that Mondrian did throughout his life. And that is the vertical and the horizontal. See the horizontal we're feeling here. And then here, this insistent on repeating the squares and the rectangles. And we see them more defined in themselves as squares and rectangles as we look at the background of this portrait. Also notice how angular the shape is of his face. He's given us this vertical view even though he's got his body turned a little bit more in the other direction. But look at inside there how you can see these shapes broken up, and you can see the straight line, straight line, straight line. He loved those straight lines, especially those straight vertical lines and the straight horizontal lines. And everything that he did, we continue to see that emphasized. Now let's move to another one here. And we see here, if we look real carefully, you're going to see the representation or the hint of a figure here and a figure here. And it looks like this figure perhaps is turned in this direction, and this figure is turned towards this figure. But look at all those straight lines, and look at all of that repetition of horizontal, of vertical, horizontal, and of square and rectangle. He's forming all shapes of rectangles, suggestion of rectangles. See some triangular shapes in there, but it's the straight line, that straight edge, and that tendency to want the things to feel horizontal and vertical that we keep seeing repeated throughout. Now, if we move to another one that he did about 5 years later, look at that. This is almost totally realistic, but there's something going on in here that we also see consistent throughout his work, and that is his trying to use the fewest number of colors possible. How is it possible to do a painting with the fewest number of colors? And we see here, really, the only colors he's used throughout here are in the orange to red, orange to yellow, orange range. We see the repeated red, orange here, but look at the shape. Look at the shape. Here we go. More of these squares and rectangles, more of the repeating of the vertical line, all the way through here. You see that vertical repeated, and if I hold my brush vertical, you can see it a little better. And then we also see that repetition of the horizontal line, repeated, vertical line, and now the color, minimalist color, very, very neutral. Most of these oranges that we see in the barn and on the ground are very, very neutral. And then giving a little bit more saturation to the orange here, and that orange getting a little redder here in the dresses of the women, and then the orange itself going more towards orange in this building. The yellow orange then repeated in the faces, and then we see the red orange, yellow orange, and red orange in very, very low saturation repeated in the hair. So we see the images more clearly and more recognizable here, but we see that emphasis, that tendency of the vertical and horizontal, straight edge, straight line, vertical and horizontal. He was moving towards trying to flatten everything out on the canvas with de-emphasizing the images themselves and emphasizing the structure of horizontal and vertical as he moves along in his painting career. And then we can go from here now to the next one. This one is more typical of what we recognize today as Mondrian. And when people are talking who are familiar with him, talking about the artist himself, if they say this looks like a Mondrian or resembles a Mondrian, this is the sort of thing that people remember. Very few people, only the historians and those that really dig into the artist's lives, will be aware of this evolution of the paintings themselves all being built around the vertical and the horizontal, the square and the rectangle. And then as he simplified, you see what he's done here? He's got this down to just the primary colors, yellow, blue, there it is, and red, and black and white. And black, white, and gray, and the primaries yellow, red, and blue were the only colors that appeared in his work for the next 20 years or so. So you can see that evolution now. This was getting down to the very, very simplest possible shapes and colors, purest as he could get, as pure as he could get, for representing what can happen on a canvas. It was the work. It was the movement was during that time was down more a minimalist movement. A lot of artists were becoming concerned with how few elements, visual elements, it would take to create a painting. Visual elements here, we only have the square and the rectangle as shapes. We have variation of sizes. We have the repetition of the vertical and the horizontal of line and movement. But they're still concerned with balancing and finding unity. But all their concern is with very minimal elements and ways to create a painting on this two-dimensional surface. Now we'll go to his later work, the work we first looked at. This is more typical of his later work, and this was actually done about 20 years later. No, not quite, but this is towards the end of his life in 1944. Now, what we have just examined were little snippets, tiny snippets of his life during a 40-year period, nearly a 40-year period, of where he starts out with the windmill, and I'm just using it as an example, the way he handled the windmill in interpretation, placing that emphasis and that interest on horizontal and vertical, on rectangles and squares, and how that theme continues to appear in every single thing he touched to the very end of his life. This becomes more typical. He's become, here you see again, all of the color elements he used. He got it down to see the reds, see the yellows, see the blues, see the whites, see the neutrals, grays, and you see the black. That's all he used in the later work. So we see repetitions, we see the theme and variation, and square and rectangle, squares and rectangles, horizontals and verticals. And you see the only directional movement he's given us in this painting are horizontals and verticals as you move throughout. But he did present it in such a way that we get diagonals on the edges, the way he wanted that piece to be presented. And so within that context of those diagonals in that square, we have the same old theme with many, many variations. So you see, abstract artists aren't just throwing paint, or at least the really serious abstract artists from the 20th century especially, but even those today, they're working visual elements on the canvas itself. And many times you can look at the evolution of an artist's work, such as we just looked at here in Mondrian's work, and you can find something. It may be the way the work, the lines are moving, it may be the interest in shapes, it may be the interest in colors, but you'll find something that was innate to that artist. In Mondrian, it was that innate curiosity and love for horizontal and vertical. Just what you might say he was born with. And so that, I think, is a wonderful history lesson. Good. Be sure and view all of our quick tips. And while you're doing so, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell, so you'll always get a notice when we produce a new quick tip, which is every week. And if you have a question, leave it in the comments section and we'll make a quick tip for you. Also, take a trip over to DianneMize.com, where I have full-length lessons downloads, DVDs, lots of other stuff there, some free stuff for you. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll always be informed every time we do something new.